Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Braydon. Got a really exciting video for you guys today. So I'm joined with the owners of Carbon, Kyle and Garrett. Guys, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. You guys flew in today, first time in Boise. This is like a scenario or a situation big enough where I wanted you guys to come in to dive deeper into this topic. So you guys just released your new TruFoam series, and the core is just completely different than anything that's been made to date. And I feel like this is a peek into the future of paddle like construction. And so it's like a leapfroggy enough in technology where I wanted to have this conversation to get behind the scenes inside look from you guys. So I'm glad you guys came out. To me, this is technology of like, if you haven't seen their paddles yet, what they're doing is they completely reconfigured the core. So 99% of paddles are probably like a plastic polymer honeycomb core. Yeah. The main innovation for these paddles is a brand new core. It's made of foam, but it's not the type of foam that you think of when you say foam, right? This is new. This is different than what's been used in the industry so far. So we're going to dive into that. But to me, this is a revelation in fill, performance possibilities, R&D capabilities, and it's really exciting. And so I'm really excited to jump into this with you guys. So for this interview, I got 5 segments that we're going to jump into. Of course, we'll do introductions here first. I want to look at the TruFoam origin story. You know, it's been what, year and a half in the works?
Unfortunately, it's been a long time.
Yeah. People
not on purpose.
So we'll go into that story because it's I don't know it. It'll be fun to hear that. We'll dive deeper into the technology and R&D process. The R&D process in particular, I think, is really unique. What you guys have going on there. So excited about that. And then I have some questions just to get your guys' thoughts on the general paddle market. Then we'll talk about what's next for Carbon. So jumping straight into it, let's just do introductions. Kyle, Garrett, tell us who you are, what you do for Carbon.
You should start.
Okay. I'm Garrett, and I started, I'm part of half of Carbon. We started it in 2021. Let's see. I guess my day-to-day right now is like R&D and kind of brand development. Just kind of looking to new things always. And then, I think I have the fun part because I get to make something and then Kyle has to sell it.
Yep. Yeah. And so Garrett and I have known each other since first grade or kindergarten. Garrett was the original one that, designed the very first paddle that we came out with in those early days of 2021. He was playing a ton of pickleball, and then he kind of approached me because I had more of a, business background, and the rest is history. We joined forces, and he handles, like you said, most of the R&D, and then I'm there as a sounding board, but mostly focusing on marketing and operations, kind of behind the scenes.
That's awesome. You guys both done a killer job. I remember back early 2021, I was interfacing, I think, mostly with Garrett at the time, and you guys grew so organically. It was so cool. And I don't think there were many reviewers at the time, but I remember making that, and it got so much action. And even since then, like the interest in you guys has been consistent. The new paddles, everything you guys have done is really solid. And I remember at the time too, the website, I was like, wow, someone made a website that's a real website for pickleball. And so you've done a great job on that, and you guys have just been killing it. And here we are again with another innovation. You guys have always been at the front. You were one of the first to do the Gen 2 style. You popularized the raw carbon fiber, even like the little paddle eraser. You guys like invented that pretty much.
Yeah.
So you guys have always been there, and it's obvious that you guys play pickleball, you know pickleball, and you can create products for people, and they've always enjoyed them. So that's awesome. Let's go into the origin story here. So where did this idea spark come from? Was it handed to you? Did you come up with it? Let's just go into the story of the TruFoam.
So the story of TruFoam was essentially myself and our engineer Nam that is on our team now, and he reached out to me. He kind of found me through a relative of his that plays pickleball and actually played with me in a tournament. And it was like, hey, I met this guy. And then he was like, okay, let's meet up. And so at that time, we were really looking to develop something new to tackle the issue of core crush. That was our biggest thing. And so he jumped in with us to just kind of start looking into different, essentially, properties to develop a core on. And
so core was always the goal. You were looking at different core materials. That was the focus.
Yeah. That's really where it started. And Nam, Kyle, and myself, we all have a pretty big passion for surfing. And for whatever reason, it just kind of led to foam. Foam was the first thing. We were like, what if we could make a paddle that was kind of like a surfboard? And that was the like kind of the inception of it. And we're like, okay, let's dive into this a little bit. And so Nam and I were just we really tried almost every type of foam out there. Experimented with different stuff, different layups, even tried like putting stringers in a paddle, like exactly like a surfboard is built. And it led us to the core that we have now, which is TruFoam.
We should have brought some of the early day prototypes, or I'm sure we can like send you photos. They're pretty cool, actually. I mean, it literally looks like a surfboard on the inside. Like you rip the core open and then it's got like these stringers like you would see on a surfboard.
What a stringer
bamboo.
Oh yeah, so a stringer is just like a balsa wood. Piece of wood running through the foam. Like if you've seen a surfboard, there's usually one straight down the middle. Sometimes there's three, sometimes they're internal. But it kind of just looked like a weird looking surfboard, but tiny in some ways.
We'll get more into this in the technology piece because I want to talk foam. There's a lot of, because foam's new, there's a lot of misunderstanding of foam itself and how there's so many different kinds and why some work better than others for cores. But so surfboards was the inspo. That was the first thing. I guess when you look at it, we can pull one up here, hold one up. It's kind of surfboardy. Like a
little bit.
You can see it a little bit.
Yeah.
So we're going through the story from beginning to end. What were some of the biggest challenges or hurdles you had to overcome? Like if you were to go through like the timeline, it's like, okay, the first 3 months was finding the right material. The next 3 months was finding the right design. Like how did that process look?
It was really a lot of just trial and error. Nam would, he and I would both work on an idea. We'd say, hey, what about, this type of foam and, this, type of void structure is what we're calling, the way that the holes are cut in the paddle. It's our, the void structure. And I would essentially go out and play with it and either, think it was promising or think it was complete garbage. And it was just a lot. It was probably like a half a year of just doing that. Some of the paddles that we first tried were absolute, just like cannons. They're like the most illegal thing you would ever see on. But
that's when we're like, all right, there's potential here. Yeah. Like we can tone this down if it's too hard now.
Yeah. But I think one of the biggest things that we wanted to really focus on was like simplifying how to make a core and like kind of equate it to almost like how complex a combustion engine can be versus an electric motor and how simple it is. And like, when an electric motor, there's really very few things that can go wrong, right? It's very simplified, and that's kind of what we wanted to try to do. Where like there's the less that there is going on, the less chance that there's something can like break. And
that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, because you have what Gen 2 paddles, Gen 3 paddles that are essentially foam enhanced almost, you could argue, that you're adding foam in different areas that are fusing with these other materials, usually, honeycomb or, ribs or stringers that these other brands are using. And that's usually where you're getting that, break-in period or the core crush or the inconsistency in play over time.
Yep.
And so it's, we had to almost start from the ground up because I think a lot of people were just taking what was already being made, honeycomb, and then just adding to it. Instead, we just scrapped the whole thing and then built something simpler.
And at the time, foam probably wasn't even a thing in paddles. Like that came later, where now we have see a lot of the dual foam edge walls. That probably wasn't even a discussion or even in play at the moment.
It was like starting. Then I think also there's this misconception, I think you already referenced this, is like people get confused when they hear foam, they think it's all the same. And I mean, foam is one of the most diverse materials that you could source
Which I've learned
or make.
recently because I've been researching it and I was like, oh, I did not realize there's this whole world of foam.
So for example, like our TruFoam core is not EVA or PMI, which I think are the two more common foams that are used out there by other paddles. It's something completely different. And you can make foam play however you want. And so I think people hear foam and they think it's going to hit super hard or be illegal. And that's not necessarily the case. It depends what you do with it. And so I think that's going to be an education thing for us and the world out there, that our paddle, the technology is called TruFoam, and they're going to assume it's going to play like a cannon, like it could. But for this paddle, we didn't go that direction. We wanted it to be, kind of an all court paddle that makes you better in all attributes and not just maximizing one thing.
Yeah. One of the things I mentioned in my review is how cool it is that you can use foam to create a control paddle, an all court or power, just depending on your configuration. Whereas right now, pretty much all foam equates power. And so with your guys' tech and these voids, you can manipulate it in the way you want it to play, right?
Yeah.
Which is super cool.
I think it gives us an advantage ongoing, as well as these governing bodies are kind of adjusting rules. We can kind of hone in the play style or the attributes like kind of on a granular level, where if you're using polypropylene or some of these other materials, it's much harder.
Yeah.
Like if your paddle gets unlisted or they come out with rules that like pull things back, some of those brands are going to have to start from the drawing board and start over. They can't just pull back a few, points here and there.
Sure.
Yeah, so with this platform, it's just kind of like if we want to make a tweak, it's super granular, and we just, change the way the voids are laid up, or even, experiment with slightly different densities.
Yeah, well, I love that, and we'll speak more to that here in a second. But going back to the story, was there any moments where like, okay, we're onto something, we have it here, let's go make this happen? Like, when did that happen? At what point?
I think one of them we already referenced was like we had a paddle and it hit like a cannon, and you're just like, you had that feeling like, all right, there's something there's something here. And
the spin on it, like when it was so, the core on it itself was like so loose, and you could feel it just like flexing so much, and you're like, oh my gosh, if we can tame this beast, and make it something that's actually compliant. And because using it as a prototype, or as an unlisted paddle, you could do that too. That's super fun, but nobody would want to play with you, right? So,
Although that's starting to become a thing. These unapproved.
We've got a lot of them. We have a closet of 300 prototypes at the office that are just piled up.
Just cheat codes.
Yeah.
So obviously this process took a long time. What was it, a year and a half, 2 years? What do you think the total timeline was from inception to launch? Well,
it kind of got leaked at 2023 Nationals, right? I think that's when we first were telling people about it, and that's when we flew out to have some of our pros test out some of the prototypes that we had, or it was pretty much like what we thought was our final-ish prototype, and so we were super excited about it. The prototyping procedure essentially that we work on with Nam at his shop and back in California is honestly, it's really fast. We can put a paddle together within a day.
That's so cool.
And just have something completely new, within a day or two. And, I think we got really excited and possibly a little bit ahead of ourselves when we had what we thought was our final prototype. And we're like, okay, well, all we got to do is what we do with Nam at the shop, and we can, just exponentially increase that. And
so scaling was the biggest challenge.
Scaling was an issue.
Going from basically handmade to mass production with something more complex than we had ever dealt with, and that these factories had never done. They'd never used these materials, let alone the process or anything that we were doing. That was way harder than expected. And like Garrett said, we were a little bit naive in not purposely, but accidentally sort of leaking this information to basically you paddle reviewers, and then you guys couldn't help but post something about it, and then the rest is history, and people have been waiting for TruFoam for a year and a half, which is great that people care, but I also apologize in the future. We just wouldn't want the public to know, so they don't have to wait so long. But yeah, that's been the hardest thing, and we're finally through that with the manufacturers that we're working with, but we had to customize a lot of the machinery, buy new machinery that hadn't ever been seen in paddle manufacturing facilities. So a lot of that stuff was new to them and us, and it's just not something that we realized would take this long, I guess.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'm glad we finally made it. Props to you guys for sticking with it.
Thanks.
Let's dive into the technology now. So we've hinted at that this foam is really unique. I want to talk about foam. Let's pull this up. How is this foam different than what's being used on the market? What are the types of foams you played with or could use, and why is this what you want?
So, what we have, it's relatively proprietary. So this is just a high density foam that we have kind of established as our own. And it differs from, I mean, right now what you're seeing on the market in especially like Gen 3 paddles is it's essentially it's expansion foam. And what they're doing is they're laying that up around the edges, and then it's kind of actually rolled into like a pre-preg carbon fiber burrito, and it goes around the perimeter.
It's the best description I've ever heard.
Yeah, and then it
We just ate burritos before this. It's on Garrett's mind.
I'm still hungry. Should have got two. Anyways, and then it goes into the mold, and then the heat in the mold expands it essentially.
Okay.
And that's really what's the most common. And then I guess like the Vice paddle, that prototype, the Diadem, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's EVA.
That's EVA.
Right?
And
I've seen others mess with EVA, but I haven't found success with it.
so the problem with EVA is there's a lot of air pockets in that foam, and so it has a tendency to break down faster.
So from what I understand, there's open cell foam and then closed cell.
Yeah.
EVA is an open cell where it can crush and change over time, but this
This
doesn't
is closed cell. Yeah.
It doesn't change, right?
Right.
Theoretically.
Yeah, and I mean you can push on this and see how dense it really is.
Yeah,
it's dense while at the same time there's flex to it. If you
There's like a little give, but
Yeah, just a tiny bit.
but it's more
not
like
much.
give
no.
like if you're. It's more here that you're flexing, or like
Not so much on the push, yeah.
within the
Yeah.
face. Yeah, but like within one specific location, you're not like compressing the foam much at all.
Oh, so the flex is more just the whole
Yeah, and so
paddle.
it
like
durability is huge.
if you laid up a paddle with just a blank like this, it wouldn't feel very good. It would feel kind of like just kind of duddy. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like
plank of wood.
So,
Yeah,
so
so
these,
kind of feel
so these
planky.
voids are what give it the feel, the different performance characteristics.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what you were messing with. Like you found the foam.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, this is the
That-
material we want to use. We know this isn't going to break down because this isn't going to break down, right? Theoretically, this is going to last way longer than
Right.
a polypropylene core.
should last longer than like your surface roughness. At this
Yeah,
point.
the other materials are going to break down. You're
Yeah.
going to scrape the edge guard into oblivion before like the core would break.
So like
probably.
the two things that break down right now, at least, is you have your grid that wears down,
Yeah.
and the core's next. Cores used to last a little bit longer, but then you had thermoforming and all these things now, and especially with the introduction of foams and a lot of other paddles, we're seeing the durability drop, where a paddle will last, 3 months maybe, depending on how hard and often you play. So as far as from like a durability core perspective, this isn't going to give out. It's going to be other factors like spin or something that give out first.
Honestly, yeah, it's almost like most people are gonna bust their edge guard up before that.
Before
That's
that.
the biggest thing, yeah.
Yeah.
And like you were mentioning, that this is what took us the longest to kind of land on was the layup of the void structure. We went through when we realized we would have to be cutting or injection molding voids into the core. Then we were like, oh boy, okay, now what? Where do we go for? And we tried to just think of different ways that would allow the ball to respond really well. And the first few iterations that we had were decent, but I think this particular model which is what we're calling the Genesis, it performs super well, and it gives a lot of what is it like? It's very like forgiving, but also it can deliver the power when you need it. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of dynamic. I noticed that too. Where my experience was it feels different from it's not that plastic on plastic feel. It's definitely more like a little softer, a little more intuitive, more natural. Like I'm trying to find the words to explain it because it's different. But to me, it's like more natural.
I'm
Like,
glad
it feels
you're-
like the way the paddle should. to
You're
me.
having problems verbalizing it because we are too. Like from a marketing standpoint, it's really difficult to like write in words how it feels because it's just completely different than what's out there. And so like the only answer is like you kind of have to just try it.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes difficult to tell people to like take that leap of faith to try something new. But I think demoing it's kind of like the only way to really understand.
Yeah, that's the best way. But I still think there are ways you can. It's not totally foreign, right? It's familiar, but just softer, more intuitive, more natural. It's just a little different because there's nothing else out there like it. But I was able to pick it up and just start playing, pretty immediately. Like it didn't take long to adjust. It wasn't. Sometimes I'll play with a paddle. It has a different feel that it takes me a few rounds, a few sessions to get a new, a feel for it. Like just my hands and body just knows what I'm going to get from it. Whereas this came pretty quick, which is I think cool. But yeah, there's you kind of have to try it a little bit, and it's not. I don't want people to think this is not. It's not this huge change. It's subtle.
No, it's
but
very subtle.
but it's nice.
Yeah.
And it's cool that way. And I think it's one of the benefits to it. You don't feel as many vibrations. There's a lot of cool things to it that way. So talking to about the R&D process, because I think this is really unique. So you mentioned a couple of times now you were just cutting these at home, trying different, I guess you're trying different voids, just different combinations of stuff. So you cut it out, test it, tell your engineer like, oh, I wish I had a little more power, a little more forget. Like what kind of feedback were you giving him? And then he would just change it up a little bit?
That's pretty much how it went. Like, you know, the other thing was we had to land on the proper density as well. That's a huge one, because if it's for this material, if it's too light of a density, it won't pass deflection. So you have to make sure it's hard enough to hold up against deflection. And then also,
so changing the voids will affect that a little bit.
That can as well. Yeah. And so, yeah, it was pretty much, it would just, I would play with it, come back like, hey, like the sweet spot could be bigger, or, you know, I think it needs to hit a little harder, or, okay, hey, hang on, this one hit way too hard. Like I couldn't control it. So it was just really finding the kind of Goldilocks paddle. Yeah.
And I think, you know, for your viewers, you know, a lot of them are pretty knowledgeable about this sort of thing, but if you've never tried to manufacture something overseas that's innovative, like the fact that we can rapidly prototype domestically saves us an insane amount of time.
It's a huge deal.
Yes, it took us 18 months to come to market with this, but it was for different issues. The prototyping was really fast. Like we already said, I mean, you know, Garrett gives feedback and, you know, our engineer could have a new paddle the next morning. Like that's kind of unheard of and pretty cool that we could be changing things that quickly.
So what was your R&D process before? Like you talk to your factory and you say, hey, give me a different layup.
Like, they send you a bunch of different versions,
and it takes
one version,
a few weeks
and then
to ship back and forth, right?
They'll ship it by air to you. So also that's expensive. They ship it to you. Half the time they may not totally understand what you're trying to explain to them.
So
also,
many things you can change too, right?
Before, yeah.
This would have been insane to try to prototype with it, yeah, because it was so foreign to everybody. But yeah, previously with just honeycomb and some of these other things, you're like, all right, you know, probably some of these Gen 3 paddles, they're just like, all right, try sticking foam around the edge. All right, now stick it in the cells and stick it, you know, wherever, try a different foam. Like that's probably what they were doing to try things out. Or you have someone go to China at the factory that does lessen the time too. And you could sit there with the factory and work on prototyping with them. So, you know, one or the other. We personally, you know, obviously have to run the business as well. So we couldn't spend all our time just in China. So being able to do it domestic is huge, because then we can do both.
Yeah, I think that gives you guys a big advantage when you're able to iterate and test multiple prototypes. You said you went through how many prototypes, you think?
I mean, we have at least like 150-ish.
Like that's bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had to take a guess, I don't really know, but if I were taking a guess how many prototypes an average company goes through before they go to market with the paddle, it's probably no more than 10, maybe. Like it can't be it can't be that.
And especially
crazy.
if it's an iteration off something that already exists. They're like, all right, I like that brand, that paddle, give me that one, but then like make it a little wider, a little taller, a little thicker, whatever. Yeah. They kind of just change it.
So
like
it's
that.
so cool that you were doing that for this paddle, but also for future paddles. You guys are able to iterate, test, and figure out different combinations that you want. You probably have your next two paddles figured out.
No comment.
Yeah. But I think that's the key for people to understand is like, all right, so TruFoam is the platform that we're building on, like this technology we plan on continuing to build on. And so, yeah, we're just working on other prototypes using similar technology. Yeah. And like the Genesis is the first of that. But we have other things that we're working on that we'll probably try to maximize or focus on different characteristics like within a paddle. This I think is like a great all court paddle for most every player. Yep. From beginner to advanced will be a good paddle, but other ones we can focus on if you really want control or really want power or some other attribute, we can maximize for that.
That's awesome. And these paddles come in 14 millimeters. Why'd you go with 14, not 16? Or is it always going to be 14? Are you changing that?
So right now it's 14. It was 14. Like that's what we started off of, like just trying to go for, because I personally just really like the thickness of a 14. Like I feel like it shapes really well. It feels like a little more aerodynamic than a 16. Mm-hmm. And then as we kind of progressed, you know, when we landed on how dense we needed our foam to be, it actually could potentially be a weight issue that you have to solve for. Luckily, we were already kind of at 14. We didn't have to worry about it. But, you know, if it was 16, if we decide to somehow try to do 16, you know, we would have to figure out different void structures and how to cut weight. But really, you can control everything you need in power and touch on a 14 millimeter platform just by changing the way the core reacts. So there really isn't a need for.
I think
a
that's
16
the most important part that I think is going to be harder for some of like the viewers to totally wrap their heads around, because I think the industry has trained people. Okay, you know, I've got a 12 mil, a 14, and a 16, or whatever you've got in between there. And all right, if I go thicker, I get a little bit more control, a little less power on average, and you know, vice versa if you go the opposite way. And with ours, what Garrett's basically saying is like, kind of throw that, you know, philosophy out the window to some extent. Like we've chosen 14 mil to build on, and we can change how it plays on the inside. Whereas like the old school days, you changed how it played by just giving your, you know, a little bit more like honeycomb basically, or polypropylene, or cutting it. And because that was the only like levers they could pull. Like they're not going to change the honeycomb. So they're like, you know, to the factory, to your point of, you know, just, all right, give me a thicker one, give me a thinner one, and see how it goes.
Yeah, that's cool. So 14's the future, we think. We're going to stay there for a minute?
Yeah, I think so.
At least now, for now.
Yeah. Yeah, and from my experience, I think compared to other 14s, they're a little more forgiving. But I do think when you compare it straight to a 16, there are 16 still that are more forgiving than that, but these are certainly better than I think past gen. But it's another thing I noticed. I don't know, maybe you guys tell me what you think about this take. So for 14s, normally I feel like they have a little lower launch angles. You can keep them down, and as you go thicker with a 16, they kind of makes the ball a little loopier. These almost behave like a 16 that way, where you can get a little more shape, a little more loop than you can with most 14s. So yes, it's a 14, but it almost behaves like a 16 in some ways.
Well, so I think it's what you're referring to in like on a 16, what you're going to be feeling in that loopiness, that's dwell, right? That's because the core is thicker, it's allowing to compress a little bit more, right? And so the ball's going to be sitting on the paddle a bit longer. And that's kind of what we've accomplished with this core in a 14 is, you know, the core flexes a little bit. So the ball sits on there a long time. And, you know, you kind of get the best of both worlds because of that.
So you can just make the ball dip like crazy.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not crazy. Because
No,
yeah.
And it's a huge advantage. And I think a lot of people just assume, you know, topspin you generate from grid or surface roughness only. And I think a huge amount of it is dwell time, especially for people with like really good technique. They can just, you know, dip the heck out of the ball when they're hitting it with this.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I did feel like the spin behaves similar to like a gearbox, where there's sometimes when you connect with it just right from the baseline, you see just a ton of dip, and then it's just kind of normal at the kitchen with speed ups and stuff. But you do see some behavior sometimes with like a big serve when you hit it just right, that you get a little more action from it.
For sure.
Yeah.
So is there a break in with this being foam? I know people are going to think it's going to break down, it's going to compress over time. Have you experienced any break-in with any of your testing? Is that a thing with these?
So I wouldn't say it's actually there's any break-in from a traditional sense. Like, you know, I don't know, Kyle can speak really well to this but I think a lot of the companies, you know, are using that as like a feature, and we kind of see break-in more as a flaw.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, in all the YouTube channels, you look in the comments, or you look on Reddit, you look in Facebook groups, it's all these people trying to compare, like, oh, I bought this paddle, like, how is yours playing? How's your, oh, I've been playing for, you know, 7 days. Is it the same as yours? And in theory, you know, like, we've gotten rid of all of that. Like, this is like how it plays. Day one is how it's going to play through its, you know, lifetime. Outside of some of the other things we talked about, like, you know, the surface, like things do break down, or your edge guard. But outside of that, you're not going to be looking for the core to play vastly different. So if you don't, you know, you should give it some time to get used to it, but you shouldn't be like trying it in the beginning and thinking like it's going to change over time, which I think is a huge advantage, because in our opinion, those break-in periods, like that's just, frankly, the core breaking down. And so like, yeah, you might get into this sweet spot, but what's stopping it from continuing to break down as you continue to play with it and eventually get to a point where it doesn't play well, or maybe it's overpowered and not legal, or shouldn't be legal, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a huge deal. I agree with the fact that the break-in thing is a flaw in design. When thermoforming things first came in, that wasn't even, no one marketed that when they first came out. They had to change the way they spoke about it so that people would buy it a little bit. And I don't like that paddles change over time, or like, okay, maybe it can change just a little bit, but enough where it's the same ballpark, right? Like
Exactly.
you don't want different paddles 6 months down the
and
road.
USAP, UPAA, I mean, to my knowledge, they don't like it either. Like that's a big issue is that they test something and it changes over time, and they're all working on implementing, I believe they're calling it like destructive testing, so that they
I'm
can
excited
test.
about that.
Right. And so you look at some of these brands and paddles and we're trying to get ahead of it because we know this is coming. And so, maybe we're, there's opportunity for us to launch something into that area that we could have launched in the last year and a half, but we kind of just saw the writing on the wall that this didn't make sense long term for the sport or for consumers. So, this puts us in a good place to have a paddle that stays the same. So if we get it approved, then we're kind of good to go.
Love that. So looking to the future a little bit with TruFoam, do you think we're going to see more people do it? I feel like if other brands can, we're going to see this potentially be the future of paddles. Do you see it the same way? How do you guys see TruFoam impacting the market?
We've talked about it, and I think the answer is like yes. I think a bunch of people will copy us. If they're not, frankly, that means then it wasn't a success in our eyes. Like I think we're trying to be at the forefront, and people want to copy us if we're doing well. I think, if I had a crystal ball, I would assume 2025 and 26 maybe is the year of just a ton of Gen 3 paddles. Like every brand, kind of like you saw with Gen 2, right? Like everybody is going to be able to like catch up and do similar things there. And, we put this in a kind of a class of its own as like a Gen 4 paddle because it's not foam enhanced. It is simply foam. Whereas I think, so basically a ton of Gen 3 because it's lower hanging fruit and easier to do. So people can just go to existing manufacturers and figure out how to do the same thing. And then I think at least the bigger brands, the ones with R&D resources, are probably going to be chasing after this as well in some version quickly.
Will you be able to stay differentiated from these guys that come in potentially?
So, we've got a head start, a year and a half working on this stuff, knowing the materials. We've got a lot of stuff on the back burner, like ready to go. So I hope so. And I think for us, we do the best we can from a IP standpoint, so intellectual property, trying to protect all the stuff that we're developing. But at a certain point, I don't think we can rely on that only as our strategy there. We just got to innovate fast. So we just want to stay at the forefront and continue to launch new products rapidly. And if everyone's chasing behind and doing similar things, that's okay too. Ultimately we want the sport to be better and feel like these are better paddles for the sport and players anyways. So it's a good thing if everyone does it.
Yeah, I think that's a good attitude to face. And you guys are in a good position too with your R&D. Okay, say this material becomes popular and available in China or something. No one can still iterate the same way you guys can, test as many different void structures or whatever. And so I feel like there's other advantages too. And you guys have experimented with 150 already. You already know what works, what doesn't. And if somebody's trying to copy, they don't have that experience. So you guys, I feel like you have a lot of edges there. Yeah. And it'll be fun to see how things happen. But there's also being a first mover, I feel like is a big advantage.
Yeah, it's a little bit scary at times, but it's a good thing.
People will recognize you guys for that too.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Let's move on to the next segment. I'm going to just ask you guys some general questions of your takes on the paddle market. So first one, what are the challenges and opportunities facing the paddle industry from your perspective?
I think a big one is knowing what's coming, like months or, weeks, even a few months in advance, like what will be allowed, what will be unallowed. Unfortunately, it feels like there's so much gray area on what the different governing bodies are doing, and everything seems like it's still changing and in flux. So that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah, they're still trying to work on communication and what their plans are long term, both USAP and UPAA. It's been we have a good relationship with all of them, but it's also been frustrating at times. It's really hard to hit a moving target. And so I think the brands are probably feeling this.
At first you were probably optimizing for deflection, and now you're optimizing for PB core. Maybe you got lucky and it just worked for both.
So this paddle was the first one to be tested for PB core because it happened to be happening when all of the YOLA stuff was going on. Mm-hmm. And so they were, like USAP was super, careful about what they were going to be accepting moving forward. So they wanted to make sure this thing passed PB core before we even had a number for PB core. So they wouldn't tell us, what number it was or what their limit was until after we had this one passed. So
interesting.
it passed, and then we're like, okay, so now we know
now
what the max is. So it's a little late, but now it's something we can work towards in the future. Is hitting that top level of where USAP and UPA's eventual PB Core will be.
Yeah, and all these paddles are, like Garrett said, they're, I guess, what's the right terminology? PB Core 43 certified, I think is what USAP is calling it. So that, kind of labeling will be on the paddles. Our first batch of paddles, we didn't have the logo from USAP yet because don't ask me why. They were taking a long time with that. But the second batch will have them. We'll have that on there.
Okay, cool.
But they're all approved either way.
Yeah,
Nice. And sounds like you have some room to work within that PB Core testing to bump it up, or if you wanted.
Yeah, there's a little bit of space there. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So how far, this one's always interesting to me. Just talking about paddle innovation. When I look at other industries, particularly tennis, they don't release stuff as often. PB or pickleball, the paddle cycle is a lot quicker. Whereas in tennis, they'll release a new racket once every couple of years or something. It's a lot slower. They've reached a ceiling, I guess you could say.
right.
How far away do you think pickleball is from hitting a ceiling, if ever?
I think it's so hard to tell. Like, like a year and a half ago, we didn't know where it would be going. Like the Gen 3 stuff seemed really cool, before we were thinking about this, so I was like, okay, then what? I think there's some space. It depends what the rules allow for, but there's some really interesting concepts to be, at least played with, provided the rules allow it. But there's some interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think we got years on it. How many years? I don't know. 2 to 5 years until it becomes, smaller changes and tweaks. Like you're not just overhauling the whole technology from the ground up kind of thing, I'm guessing. But who knows? I mean, I think the sport is fascinating for everybody involved because it's like still in its infancy, but it's growing so fast and there's so much money to be made. So all these big players are coming into it. The same thing happened in all these other sports, but I think it was slower and in a different era. Like you just didn't have this like rapid competition all at once very quickly. So, I mean,
that's a good point because no other sport has been made in like the modern era. I guess padel maybe another one that's close-ish, but yeah, everything else is so ancient, right?
Well, they didn't have Alibaba or
Totally
AliExpress when you were designing the first baseball glove or something like, or baseball bat, right? Like it's everybody, if they wanted to, can create a paddle company. And you've sort of seen this, like there's a million of them and there's going to be consolidation and compression of that over time, which has been seen in every industry. But I think it's unique that there's just can be so many people trying to innovate at the same time.
I think bats are still growing. Like I follow the what is it, the baseball bat dudes or whatever on YouTube.
I don't know. You watch
it.
I
love watching their stuff. And every year it seems like a company has a new like composite blend coming out and it keeps rising.
But kind of to maybe the original question here is like, how much of that is actual innovation or is that just really good marketing? Like we see it in we both snowboard, it's the same thing. It's like they've got some fancy terminology, some like trademarked tech, which like, is it actually, or it's just like you slightly tweaked
golf's very much that way, right?
Yeah.
They come out with this new driver, it gives you an extra half yard and you're like freaking out.
So I think there's a little bit of that in pickleball already. Just inherently, it's like it's a lot of it's marketing, but we still have some from runway to get better because I feel like most of these materials that people use in pickleball, they weren't designed for pickleball. They were like kind of they just grabbed what was available, and the original founders or early on people just sort of made it. Whereas like golf's had many years to get past that point of actually using materials that they are effective for golf. Right. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and the R&D process will get more and more sophisticated. Like the way you guys are doing, being able to iterate is a big deal. Data, I'm sure, is on your guys' mind where you're like, okay, how do we measure things more on our side so that we can iterate even faster and know what's changing and things like that. And it'll get more and more complex, but it still feels like there's a big runway. But now once the rules get set, that'll shift things dramatically. It's okay, we know the limits.
Yeah.
Let's hit the limits real quick and then we'll start looking at
even
other aspects.
The data to kind of to your point, like we're one of the bigger players, but still relatively small. We don't have an unlimited budget. We can't just go buy every machine under the sun to get data that we want. And when the governing bodies are sort of changing the rules and what systems they use, like we don't know which machine to buy. And that has been difficult too. But hopefully over the next year or so, we can get more sophisticated in our own, call it lab or whatever we want to call it.
Do you guys plan on buying some of that equipment to be able to measure PB core or whatever?
I mean, we have some of the stuff for other things, not PB core related, but I mean, we're looking at it. It's just, you know, it's
Honestly,
hard until it's set in stone. You don't want to invest
Yeah.
a bunch of money on something that's moving or
But
changing.
you guys want to invest in that once you can.
For sure. And one of the issues for us right now is like it's an issue of space. How much like,
Sure.
you know, we're in Southern California. It's expensive to have like a
Come to
huge
Boise.
facility, you know,
Come
I
to
know we might need to
Boise.
relocate. So
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Okay, last question I have for you here is just what do you guys see as the future needs for paddles as you're looking to innovate in the future? What are the things you're trying to tackle?
I mean, I think for us, we're already attempting to tackle this, and I think the industry is going to, which is durability. You talked about like how fast the cycle is where people are buying and needing new paddles. So we are tackling cores here, and you know, a logical next step would be looking at things that are also break down a little bit faster than the other materials in a paddle. So like the face, for
Just
example.
general durability.
Yeah, so just durability in general. And then, you know, just maximizing, like we talked about already, like different attributes for different play style, I guess, like different things for different people. We're also, I mean, you guys are looking at different layups, I guess, for the paddle face as well. I mean, we're pretty much just look at every component of a paddle and trying to make it better at this point.
Yeah, you guys do have yes, the core is new, but you also have like a fiberglass layer kind of buried beneath a couple of carbon fiber, which I don't know if you guys have done that before. So you're mixing some common thought with other paddle manufacturers that have done some layup configurations with the polymer, but you're doing that here with these two, and it kind of gives you different flavors. So last segment here, I just want to talk about kind of what's next for carbon and what you guys are thinking about. So TruFoam's here. You guys did it. High fives. What are your goals for the next year or two?
I think for us, we would really like to, you know, not take another 18 months to launch a paddle. So I think maybe launching 2 paddles in 25 would be, that would be my goal. I think that'd be really cool. And just kind of see where TruFoam takes us. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that probably covers us all on the paddle side of things. And I think just for the rest of our business, like we're probably going to be focusing a lot on building out our team. You know, our team has been growing over the last year, but you know, hiring more people to help us expand, you know, both online and retail, internationally. I think we're also looking like how do we not only develop the best products, but also like get them out to everybody everywhere.
Yeah, international is a big topic that is starting to come up more and more as the tour expands internationally.
Yep.
The brands are going to want to follow. I mean, there's a lot of people outside the U.S.
It's pretty nuts.
I'm sure.
And we get hit up for, you know, people in various different countries looking for sponsorships all the time. And, you know, it's just kind of a reminder like, hey, we need to get our act together and get actual distribution in these countries.
Start
Like we
thinking
can't
about that.
sponsor you in this country where no one can buy our products.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. But it's a good reminder.
I mean, the distribution channels internationally, like what's available? Does it have to be online or are there stores?
I mean, in the up and coming markets, it kind of, I don't know, kind of follows the US in many ways. Like it's a lot of people who are in tennis or other racket sports that have a shop already that just throw in pickleball, but they're building courts and facilities rapidly in all kinds of places, in particular Asia.
Just getting plugged into those systems.
Yeah, it's like finding kind of like a lot of things in business. It's like who you know and networking and finding the right people in those places that are making big moves and building out these facilities and hopefully them liking our products enough to carry it and you know, build that relationship.
And then, I mean, outside of paddles too, you could just launch some glasses. You guys have apparel, bags. How much focus is on stuff outside of paddles for the next couple of years, you think? Or are you in a good place?
A couple years. I think it's been hard because we traditionally try to do too much all at the same time. And so Garrett and I, you know, it's January. We have these planning meetings coming up where we're going to look through our entire list of product ideas and probably just like prioritize the ones that actually make a difference. But eyewear has been a big one for us. That's been great. And I think bags has been another place that we've focused.
Yeah, I think we have a new bag idea that we want to get out this year too.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
You guys, I've always liked your bags. Your tour bag in particular is unique. There's nothing exactly the same as it. The materials are nicer than a lot of stuff out there. I've always liked that. And bags are an interesting one. We're starting to see more like dedicated bag brands, and I still think there's some opportunity to have some success there. So that's cool. So if you guys were to pick one thing you're most excited about for the future of the brand, what would you say it is?
For me, I would say one is the paddle. The TruFoam line in general. And then two, I'm just really excited to see, how the sport grows internationally. I think it's going to be super cool to see in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, everything Garrett said, and all I mainly care about right now is to see like TruFoam Genesis out there in the wild, people loving it, appreciating the technology.
Hyper-focused on that right now.
Yeah, like understanding
get that, yeah.
how it works. It'll be really interesting to see how much confusion there is, if there any, but hopefully we'll do a good job kind of educating people on what the differences are and why they should try it out. So
Love
we'll
it.
see.
All right, last question is just more of on a lighter note. What's one of your most fun memories or wildest memories of a fan you've interacted with, that whether it's through customer support or on the courts, that use carbon?
Oh man, one guy invited us to his wedding. That was
this
a really
random?
Cool, yeah, I sent us a wedding invite, and he like hand wrote it, and like, I'd love you guys to come. And I was like, oh man, I wish I could, but just busy.
Was it a California person?
No,
No.
it was, I forget where it was, but
Dude, how glorious would that have been? You just show up to
up.
some dude's
What's up,
wedding,
guys?
just
yeah,
gift him a paddle.
yeah.
All right, I got one. His name is Jay. I know his last name, but I'm not going to say it because I don't know if that's cool to put him on blast here. But he's one of our ambassadors, and he got a carbon logo tattooed on his arm.
No, he didn't.
Yep.
Did he really?
Yeah. No.
Do you guys have tattoos with the logo on you?
We do not. Jay, as far as I'm aware, is the one and
He's
only.
the only one.
But yeah, he got it done like over a year ago, maybe 2 years.
I feel like I might have seen this photo. Did it
it's
circulate
possible.
a little bit?
Maybe.
A little bit,
We
yeah.
got a video of it. I'll show you later. And then one of my friends, kind of into like in my personal life, she was like playing pickleball in Florida, and then she randomly ran into him and like sent me photos of his like tattoo. She like saw it on his arm. So yeah, he's committed. He's a lifer, at least I assume so, unless he gets it removed or something.
I need someone to put a Pickleball Effect logo on their body, please. If anyone listening to this, I need to catch up to these
right.
guys.
Maybe a little neck tat.
Yeah. It'd be perfect. Well, that's it. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
All right,
you.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you have any questions for these guys, put things in the comments. I'm sure they'll be here answering those. If someone wants to follow your community, join you guys, follow along, where do they find you?
They can just follow us on social, sign up for our newsletter. Those are the obvious ones, but we've been really trying to build out our Discord server, which is basically just like an online forum meets chat room for all things pickleball and carbon related. So that's
You guys are really active in there. I'm in there. You guys are
we're trying to build it out.
adding updates and stuff in there.
Yeah, so it's just carbonpickleball.com/Discord, I believe.
Okay, I'll find it. I'll put a link
Yeah.
in there. Mega Nerds Discord, casual
Yeah,
Instagram
exactly.
newsletter.
If you want like early access and early information, go to Discord. If you want to just get an email in your inbox, it's like it's time to buy. Just sign up
is
for
the
the newsletter. Yeah.
Well, there we go. Thanks, you guys.
Cool.
Thanks,
Thank
man.
you.